So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Mario Cruz. Um, and he's going to be talking about persuasive technology, artificial intelligence, and social media, the moral dilemma that we've got ourselves into. So, yeah. Um, so if you want to introduce yourself a little better, Mario, that's fine. Um, looks like, yeah, Marilyn is joining. Are you going to need me to make you a co-host? Do you have slides and all that?
Well, all I need to do is really share my screen.
That we can do that. That's what a co-host does. So I'm going to make you a co-host.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. You have been anointed with co-host oil.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Mario Cruz. I'm a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. I'm also the Associate Chief Medical Information Officer for the University of New Mexico Health System and the Medical Director of Health Information, which used to be called medical records when we had paper hospital records. I have been a psychiatrist for over 30 years now. I used previously in past lives, I was the vice chair for clinical services at the University of Arizona for 10 years. At the same time, I was chief medical officer for the counties surrounding Tucson, Arizona for behavioral health services. I then moved to the University of Pittsburgh, where I did mental health, NIH-funded mental health services research for 8 years prior to coming to the University of New Mexico. I started off my career on the Navajo Reservation in Crown Point, New Mexico. And so that's what drew me back to this area, was the beautiful countryside that you have. And I'm going to share my screen right now. And let's see, Alt F5.
Looking good.
Let's see, it should have moved. Let me see if I can do it again. Alt F5. There we are. So I'm here to talk to you and I'm hoping that this will spur a lively conversation around artificial intelligence, which is really software-driven statistical analyses, more for decision analysis, and persuasive technology and social media. And have we placed ourselves, as David had mentioned, in a moral dilemma? Computers are powerful persuaders precisely because they represent in the public opinion a kind of mathematical precision that may serve as a role model of true and accurate feedback. How many people believe what's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Doximity is truth? How many companies and government organizations believe that machine learning and artificial intelligence provide truth in their analyses as to what are the best fitted models for desired outcomes? Or when an organization buys software to, say, reduce labor costs for law enforcement, where the software identifies patterns of activity the software identifies as crime, when in fact most of the activity was spitting on the ground, walking your dog without a leash, or accidentally dropping a piece of trash. And then that pattern triggers a response, that being the police send in the SWAT team to thwart criminals. Is that really a good use of law enforcement? Persuasive technology is the intersection of computer science and cognitive as well as motivational psychology. B.J. Fobbs, the director of the Center for Persuasive Technology at Stanford University, the originator of, of this area of research now called persuasive technology, has defined this intersection whereby in the next slide, you see that behavior is actually the intersection of motivation, the abilities of the individual to act, and ultimately the prompts that drive that action. Let's see. Oops, I'm sorry about that. Now, who knew a smiley face or a thumbs up could be such a powerful driver of behavior? But that's the world that we presently live within. There are two forms of persuasive technology out in the literature. One is a conscious awareness form known as persuasive technology. The other one is an unconscious form called ambient persuasive technology. And this study, done back in 2008, used 3 feedback types: a conscious awareness, otherwise called supraliminal in this table, an unconscious awareness of the desired prompt, known as subliminal, and then a control group where there was no feedback given at all. The prompt of a smiley face was shown for 150 milliseconds in the supraliminal group and 25 milligrams in the subliminal group. 25 milliseconds. I'm a doctor, so I was thinking only in milligrams of medications. The 25 milliseconds is actually been shown to be a time that through which there is no conscious awareness on PET and MRI scans for study respondents, such that that's why the 25 millisecond response was, or time of response was used. And the response was given with the smiley face if you were accurate in defining out of 9 different appliances in a household, whether you had a low energy appliance or a high energy appliance. What this study shows through this multivariate and multiple analysis of variance is that, as you see, the low energy consumption appliances were actually identified very well by the 3 groups. And it was a 1 through 5 range of response. The high energy consumption alliance was where the differences began to show themselves, particularly between the supra and subliminal groups and the no feedback group. This suggested to the researchers that if feedback is given, like a thumbs up or a smiley face, just for instance, this has a profound effect on artificial intelligence systems that will shape future views of information, whether that information is correct or not. Jürgen Habermas, a philosopher, made a distinction looking at discourse communication analysis within our social reality. That being, communication can be used with one of 2 intentions: to either wield power in the social sphere or to have symmetrical discourses where every voice is to be heard and the voice with the best argument counts, irrespective of who spoke. He defined these 2 distinct groups as strategic rationality. That's the group that focuses in on domination, power over others, and technological wizardry, and communicative rationality, that being a discourse, autonomous decision-making, and basically showing an argument is the best one through facts rather than fiction. Persuasion, and therefore persuasive technology, I'm making this inference, should lie between strategic rationality and communicative rationality. For persuasive technology needs to have power over the user to create the desired action, but it should also not dominate the user such that the user can become their own agent and drive the action in the future. This is the difficulty that lies, I think, in the social media sphere and in artificial intelligence used in major corporations and governmental agencies. That being this gentle balance between strategic rationality that is required somewhat for persuasive technology to be useful, and communicative rationality, such that we act as our own agents, but with the use of persuasion can shape and mold our behaviors for positive things rather than negative things. Persuasive technologies can be good. There's actually a growing literature looking at health interventions using persuasive technology for weight loss, medication adherence for chronic diseases, reduction of hypertension, and how to sit with good posture in front of a computer, that being the PerFrame health intervention. It has also been shown to be quite helpful for looking at water conservation and in the use of Honda hybrid cars, for they now will let you know when you're using energy consumption that is defined by the persuasive technology as efficient and green versus inefficient. But persuasive technologies combined with artificial intelligence can lead and exacerbate inequities that are already fraught within our country. Inequities in criminal justice, as I described previously. If you send police more often to areas that quote unquote have high crime, and if you don't distinguish between serious felonies versus misdemeanors and minor felonies, you then flood one area with a lot of police. Police are taught to actually intervene with small criminal offenses, with the thinking being if you intervene with small criminal offenses, you actually reduce the risk of higher, more felonious criminal offenses. That unfortunately then targets poor areas and areas that have high concentrations of minority populations. The police go there and they then begin to see more and more crime. And they spend less time in other areas. For if they had actually distributed themselves evenly through society, you might in fact find that small crimes occur everywhere in equal numbers. We also see these inequities being shown in education, with public school systems purchasing predictive analytic and artificial intelligence and machine learning tools, using persuasive technology, because as machine learning and artificial intelligence tool basically identify patterns of data within large data sets, such that it creates models of what are the important variables to look at. When you do that in very large data sets, and when your algorithms are set to identify things that may not necessarily be the appropriate indicators for good performance, you begin to see inequities in education funding between areas within a local region. This also occurs in terms of housing as well, and in terms of business loans. Now, another thing I did want to talk about is the spread of disinformation. Google, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok is now even being used as a platform for this. Parler is another vicious example of the spread of disinformation. These tools are driven by advertising, and you want to kind of keep people within your platform to send more and more advertising to you. The problem becomes if you put up a thumb or a happy face on a message that speaks about dangerous things. And what's very interesting, there seems to be a higher relationship of happy faces and likes given to information that's related to terror, violence, and conspiracies than it is to goodness. Those are the things that the system then will try to keep you within so you can look at the advertising. And this unfortunately leads to a proliferation of the spread of disinformation over true facts. And so, as I mentioned before, persuasion, then there is a strong imbalance between its split between communicative and what I described as strategic rationality. Persuasion, with or without the uses of technology, remains a communicative act, an act in which, for example, the designer of a persuasive technology wants the user to change his behavior to reach a desired aim. Could any American at this time in the history of our country consider the behavior shown in this picture, behavior driven not just by false truths, but by the rules governing persuasive technology platforms, be considered moral and just behavior? Persuasion can also promote people who may not have the best interests for people or society. So I'd like to end with a couple of statements by two individuals who I actually admire very much. The first is by Michael Goldhaber, and actually a retired theoretical physicist who's been looking at society and saying that the strongest currency within society today is more attention than anything. And that as we struggle to attune ourselves to groups of people who feel they're not getting the attention they deserve, and we ought to get better at sensing that feeling earlier, because it is a powerful and dangerous feeling. In addition to Michael, there's Howard Rheingold, who said, attention is a limited resource, so we must pay attention to where you pay attention. And that I'd like to hopefully start getting us talking about what I think is one of the greatest moral imperatives today, to gain greater and greater control over the use of persuasive technology. Thank you.
All righty, thanks, Mario. I had a comment that when I search for something like a USB microscope, the next day on Facebook or Twitter, I will see ads for USB microscope.
Exactly.
And one of the weirder scams on Facebook that I've been researching a couple of years ago, it was all about bodybuilding supplements, but you would see on your news feed, it would look like a news article that would say Arnold Schwarzenegger is gone or Chuck Norris, he's gone. And so I clicked on one just to see what happened to poor old Chuck Norris. And then they would give you a big, it looks like a news story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from, say, ESPN or maybe CNN. But the story explains how, well, Chuck Norris isn't really in trouble, but he was using these totally legal supplements, and now people in the industry are criticizing them. But they're wonderful supplements, and you should use them too. And we had a guy test them, and then they have comments. It looks like Facebook comments, but they're all static. You can't interact with them. You can't like or comment yourself. And so anywhere you click on this supposed news story, if it's CNN, it could be news, politics, whatever. When you click there, you go to a big ad for whatever supplement. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, it was usually bodybuilding supplements, testosterone and whatnot. But the new one that I've seen several times in just the last couple months is CBD, cannabinoids, I guess. And so you'll see, Tom Hanks saying how wonderful these are. And they usually resolve to the same source. So when you click through to get the free sample, all of these ads end up saying, "Hey, free sample, month supply." But if you get that in the fine print, it says, "Well, after 14 days, we've decided that you love your new supplement, and we're going to put you on a $90 a month program where you get billed $90 a month, and you get a bottle of these pills."
Mhm.
So really quite the scam.
The other frightening piece to this is if you link your phone, your computer, your phone to your laptop, you will actually find the same advertisements coming up on each one of them.
It's spooky. So anyway, the moral of the story is that I wanted to see some more of these ads on Facebook, and they weren't coming up. I'd seen a couple, and so then while I had Facebook open, I purposely searched for cannabinoids and things like that, and then within I think half a day or so, bam, those ads showed up on Facebook. So I was manipulating the technology, but certainly, yeah, it feels like we're being watched and manipulated.
And since
Um,
Facebook owns Instagram, if you search for something on Instagram, you'll also then begin to start seeing it on Facebook as well.
yeah. So, let's see. Sylvia had a question, and that was my question too. What can we do about getting more control over these persuasive technologies?
Well, I'm going to pose another question. Does capitalism play a role in this?
It sure
Yeah,
seems like it does. Yeah.
absolutely.
And if we want to maintain a capitalist system, I do believe there needs to be a balance between capitalist economics and social economics in a society, so that societies can grow and progress and advance with technologies. And if we apply capitalism in this area, should there be greater regulation? That seems to be the lever that you can use to kind of control capitalism when it gets out of control in a certain industry space. Sylvia, you're on mute.
Oh, so what do you think makes some people so susceptible to this kind of messaging and manipulation? Because of course, many of us already understand, that if you go to a store online, pretty soon you're gonna look at the lamps, that you were trying to look at with everything that you do, because they'll send you all the ads. But then, I try not to do that, but there are people who really fall prey to that. So what do we do? What makes such people that susceptible?
Well, there have been functional MRI studies to show that certain individuals emotionally respond at a much higher level to some of these prompts than other people. Some of this, I believe personally, is related to the level of critical inquiry capacity that individuals have, and that can vary across both the economic stratum and by individual.
Mhm.
And so I personally believe that public education plays a great role in this. What we've seen over the last, 40 years is really the destruction of the public education system.
Mhm.
And I've noticed that younger people who come into public education, a lot of them really have a hard time understanding how to critically think through a problem. What we find on MRI studies, in fact, is that some individuals who have higher levels of critical thinking, they have higher cortical regions that light up when they respond to advertisements, things like that. That lets you know they're kind of thinking about this and saying, well, should I really do this? Shouldn't I really do this? Whereas other individuals, their emotional areas of their brain seem to light up when it comes to certain advertisements. And therefore, they're not thinking, they're just reacting. They're just automatically responding to a happy, smiley face, a thumb up.
I I think a big part of it is the algorithms. Like on YouTube, if you start looking for flat Earth videos, then if you don't choose anything, YouTube will choose something for you. And if you start choosing conspiracy theory topics, that's what you usually see on your feed. So it's a self-licking ice cream cone. It's a reinforcement measure that once you start to go down a rabbit hole, it sort of greases the sides to make it easier
Yeah.
for you to slide down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll see subliminal advertising too being placed, like I've noticed on the right side of if I'm scrolling through, say, MSNBC News, if you look on the right side, you'll begin to see things pop up and disappear, pop up and disappear. And it's all advertising. And I wonder why it's leaving so fast. They actually are performing ambient persuasive technological interventions.
Mm-hmm.
So that you walk away remembering it, even though you never cognitively or consciously were aware that you saw it.
So going back to some people being more susceptible to this, is there any connection between people who tend to be more afraid of change, maybe to have a more conservative mindset, and their gullibility or their susceptibility to this kind of manipulation?
Fear seems to be a greater reinforcer for action. And that's a frightening piece of knowledge that many advertisers know, political pundits know, and criminals seem to know pretty well too, particularly psychopaths. I won't say any names as good examples, but I think you can infer who I'm talking about.
Let's see, is it rhyme with president?
Maybe ex-president.
Another thing is what Facebook has pages, and I take advantage of some of those. They have good news on the latest politics, but they're sort of biased toward one group I'm in says, man, we got to dump our new congressperson down in the South here, Yvette Herrell, because she actually voted to overturn the election. So and of course you see that slant of news on that page, but it provides a mechanism for echo chamber effects where you get reinforcement from people that share a belief, and those beliefs get reinforced the more people like them and whatnot. So just the existence of echo chambers on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram is a way that technology is influencing public opinion.
Yeah. One recommendation I have, I really think we have to be cautious about the use of ambient persuasive technology, because it can even grab those of us who believe we are truly critical thinkers, that we too can be susceptible to that form of advertising or persuasion or coercion, however you want to define it. And the other thing I really think has to be addressed is education. We have to improve the educational system so people have for a larger body, percentage of the population can critically think through issues so as to question the information that they're looking at, rather than just assume it's truth because it's coming from a computer.
I have a thought about whether there's an intersection between religion and people who are more easily persuaded.
Interesting.
I mean, certainly if you look at the political and the religious right, there seems to be a connection. And I'm wondering, with the schools and the voucher system, you end up having more religious education to boot. So there's another weak point, in my opinion. I don't know if you have a thought on that.
A social form of an echo chamber.
Yeah,
Yeah, and well, I was trying to imply that the charter school system could in fact reinforce some of this inflexibility and fear in people, such that they react to a lot of this advertising, the spread of disinformation, in a much more reinforcing way than people who would not, say, be in charter schools that are strongly religious in nature.
mhm.
So education takes a long time, right? From the
Mhm.
time the child starts school till they become maybe high schoolers where they may be able to think more critically. Do you see anything going on in terms of trying to put some limits on this, or trying to do kind of the kind of research that will produce results with respect to protecting our space earlier? You see anything going on in government or in academia that will lead to more attention being paid to this on a more immediate basis?
I have not. Well, the one thing, the unfortunate thing that I do see, which there's a there's a positive piece to it and a negative to it, and that is we have created it within our society a digital chasm between the haves and the have-nots. And there has been a lot of focus, particularly towards government, in terms of subsidizing people for better plans, for their smartphones and their Wi-Fi systems, so that they can cross the digital divide. Unfortunately, by crossing the digital divide, you can fall into these unfortunate traps for individuals who are probably already prepared and susceptible to disinformation,
Mhm.
bad advertising. And they will gravitate towards it because they have unfortunately been reinforced to react to fear
Mhm.
rather than thought and facts.
So do we come back to oversight then, some kind of effective oversight? I don't know, where do we go? I mean,
Well, there have been an incredible number of hearings recently looking at social media
Mhm.
and asking the question of whether there should be governmental regulation.
Yeah.
I firmly believe there has to be governmental regulation. It's not a question of should we, it's a question of when should we, and how much should we have governmental regulation in these areas. But in terms of artificial intelligence being used to identify at-risk groups for criminality, which populations will pay back their loans versus those who won't, which groups need more funding for education. I firmly believe that government is playing an unfortunate role where they're reinforcing inequities. And they really have to, and government really has to begin to look at itself in this area, because what they've been trying to do is they've been trying to automate the systems in these areas because that reduces labor costs. The biggest cost of any system is labor. It's not machines.
Yeah.
And I think we have to rethink that in the long run really is the biggest cost labor or the machines.
Mhm. Mhm. Is there discussion about this among the psychiatry circles and the psychiatry societies? Anybody interested
Nope.
in this other than you?
Outside of persuasive technology being used for positive health outcomes.
Hmm.
That's where we see, and that's being reinforced by money. Where do you think the grants are coming? They're coming into that area. They're not coming into the area of questioning digital expansion, questioning the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to persuade people to improve their behavior. They're not looking for the downside. And the
Are
funding
there any,
go in direction.
I'm sorry, are there any foundations or other possible sources of funding that are looking into that?
I don't know. That's a
Like
very good
MacArthur
point.
Foundation, for example.
Right. That's
They,
a real good point. I don't know.
You know, you just.
But all of these things really worry me at this point of time. We're finding out that kids with the COVID thing, now I can't remember how many hours per day, but it's a huge number of the waking hours per day children are spending on the internet, not just for online learning, but for all forms of social interaction.
Mhm.
I think we're going to see unfortunate adverse effects down the road as when we get to whatever is going to be our new normal in terms of childhood development and their ability to critically think through issues.
you were talking about the draw of advertising driving a lot of the disinformation sites. Some of them maybe, I mean, they give the appearance to me anyway, of possibly being driven by foreign, well, say Russians, generic Russians, like QAnon, for example. That's continuing the kind of influence that their social media campaigns presented for the 2016 election. And, you know, it's not, well, it is a little bit favoring Trump's continuance in office. But main thing, it's just stirring up the pot.
Yeah.
Amongst very susceptible people who believed there was going to be the cavalry coming in and arresting all those liberal people in the Congress, in the Capitol, and, you know, standing them up against the wall, maybe, who knows?
Did any of you listen to the impeachment hearing today?
Fragments of.
Parts of it.
I was frightened. The information from the FBI, the information on the recordings from the police, knowing full well that there were individuals who clearly were going to kill Nancy Pelosi, I could not believe it. And that there was chatter going on about, she's not down here, she's not down there, let's go here, send somebody. It was frightening. Absolutely.
And one representative even Twittered, she's left the House chambers,
Right.
sort of focusing attention.
And sorry.
We're at a very difficult time, I think, in the history of man, because this is a global issue. This isn't just a national issue here.
For sure.
I think it's just because we're at the beginning of the human computer interactive period of our lives. And how we shape that relationship, I really is going to define our future and determine, I personally think, the existence of mankind and maybe even the existence of life on this globe.
No, I think there are analogies. Initially, the people that had the printing presses had a big advantage, and that was a big technological advantage. But of course, it's much slower than the internet. But I think there are lessons to be learned from history there.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
As a friend of mine, son is working on a PhD in psychology, and I believe his focus is very much what you guys have been talking about. Apparently, this is something very new in the department that he's studying, and I'm actually very interested, especially after listening to all you guys talk. I'll have to get more specifics exactly what his specific field is, but that's where he's going. And apparently he's #1 student in that field, at least at that university at the moment. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I really think we need more ethicists looking at this area. And actually, I did not look on any website to identify ethicists looking at this area at this time. I may just have to do another library search to see if there is a growing body of literature in this area. There's a couple of ethical articles that I could find very easily, but I think I'm gonna have to do a deeper search And hopefully there is a burgeoning, growing body of literature in this area to help guide us as we cross into this human-machine interface period of society. Because it's here, the door is open already. We can't close it. We have to figure out how best to manage the relationship.
Mm-hmm. And it is actually, we are dealing with that kind of an issue at the same time as we're really trying to deal about this being a democracy in its early stages. We tend to think, that we've been a democracy, 200 years, but really in the scope of nations around the world, that 200 years is nothing. So we are a new democracy, relatively speaking, really trying to deal with a new kind of technology, and the interface of those things, I think, will provide many more problems for us than they might otherwise had we been an older, more established system of government, I think.
And you add in a pandemic, which if you look at the pandemics through the history of mankind, you begin to see that mental health issues become higher always. Suicide rates, alcoholism, homicide rates always increase. And you find out conspiracy theories begin to spread like wildfires. Mm-hmm. Now we have a communicative platform that can spread conspiracy theories faster. As people become more fearful, they then become more attracted to conspiracy theories. And now we have the platforms that can send out that information much quicker. On top of that, we have climate change, which we aren't even addressing in any serious way. That's what I mean by we're at a real critical juncture in the history of mankind.
I'm sorry, sir, but you are a troublemaker, I can tell.
It just worries me for the children of the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a comment about sort of generalizing a little bit about what we've heard. One of the things that was looked at more than 15 years ago, since I've been retired from the labs that long, was the study of latent effects. And so, if you think of latency being that if you have a stimulus at one point in time, you'll have a response at some other time down the road, and there may be a whole bunch of interesting leading and lagging indicators, and people tend to want to think about things in real time. But I think that, and Mario, I loaned you that book about revenge effects. Well,
right.
This whole business of social media is some kind of giant revenge effect. And, there are good things about it, and there's certainly bad things about it. Right. But we probably should pay attention to maybe a formalized, or at least a way of getting the thoughts on the table about latency, because there a lot of latency is going on here, but I'm not sure that people really know what to make of it. And things are changing so quickly now that folks like Facebook have introduced a whole mess of problems, and the people that might be in some position to do something about it in government are sort of caught flat-footed.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I do hope that the hearings are still going on. Obviously, there's been a few distractions recently that have caused the government's focus on regulating this area to be deprioritized. But I'm hoping that we can remove the distractions very soon so we can get down to the business of really helping society and helping the people within society.
John, I don't really understand what you mean by revenge effects.
Oh, well, let me give you an example. Many years ago, some folks were looking at the traffic accidents on the Autobahn. Now, that there are stretches of the Autobahn where there aren't any speed limits. If you're out in the countryside somewhere and you got a 200-mile-an-hour car, well, have at it, And so what was happening was there was a relatively tight turn somewhere on the Autobahn, and people were over speeding and running off the road and killing themselves.
Mm.
And so the engineers got together and they said, well, this is simple physics. Well, all we need to do is to increase the radius of the turn. And so they got busy and rebuilt the road and sat back to enjoy the fruits of their labors. And these clowns with these fast cars just sped up and kept killing themselves.
Well,
And so it was clearly, like you just know you've got a solution to a problem. And when you implement it, you go, oh, golly.
another example is football.
Yes.
They increased the quote unquote safety measures by coming up with helmets that reduce the risk of being knocked unconscious, by the padding to reduce the risk of injury. And what happened? The reaction was athletes became bigger, faster, stronger, and then felt less concerned about getting hurt when they hit you. So they would hit you with greater force.
Yep.
Which led to greater injury.
Yes.
It's an evolutionary arms race.
Yeah.
So in the general sphere of finding solutions, I think the moral of the story is that you need to think pretty hard before you jump in with that solution that you just know is going to do the trick.
And my concern is that our population at the same time of these incredible advancements are becoming less critical in thinking.
Mhm.
Yep.
Or not critical in the least.
Okay.
At least.
We
I
go
had-
to free position too, John. Yeah.
I had some comments on framing. If I can share my screen
Okay.
for a little bit, let's try that. Okay, let me find where I was. Okay. So yeah, here's an example of framing in the newspapers. The
Okay.
same bill, Washington Post headline: Arizona governor vetoes controversial anti-gay bill. Wall Street Journal: Arizona governor vetoes religious freedom bill. So just what they're calling it,
Yeah.
leads you to think, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you were conservative, you might say, well, yeah, that's good. And so here's another one. Oh, so this is Pernicious framing with disease statistics. This is real stuff from,
July 2nd.
I think that's Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here in July 2nd, the red marker is under 4,600 people.
Got
So
it.
there's some pretty bad outbreaks. And then a month and a half later, the map looks the same. But now you can see the red mark is going up to 5,000 people.
Right.
So what they did was they changed the legend to make it look the same, even though it was much worse.
Right.
So I took I plotted what these numbers should have looked like with these colors, and you see a lot more red and darker colors and orange and whatnot. Same thing up in Massachusetts, more than a month apart. 1,100 people there, more than twice there. So it kind of looks the same, but it's twice as bad. And the previous administration would come out with these surveys every year. There'd be a new survey, and so the typical question is, on what issues does the mainstream media do the worst job of representing Republicans? And you have these 8 choices, and guess what's missing? None of the above. There's no way you can answer this poll question without agreeing that the media does a bad job of representing Republicans in some way. So the next year, I guess a year later, they had changed it. They dropped these 3 things. They'd added a couple new ones, They
Mhm.
still don't have, none of the above.
Right.
And so what I show my students in class, and these are real poll questions from the former presidents, and they're basically just ad polls to get people to give them money.
Mhm.
And some of this stuff toward the end of the campaign, people were getting threatening letters. We know you received this. We know you haven't donated yet. Do you want to be on the list of people that don't support the president? Just really over the top persuasion. But here's sort of a soft pedaled survey where it says this one: do you believe the media sensationalizes and exaggerates stories to paint President Trump and conservatives in a bad light? And at least this one does let you say no or no opinion or
Mhm.
other. And here's another one: do you believe the media tries to divide Republicans in order to help Democrats? So what I told the student is, let's say you're working for uh, QAnon News or OAN or what have you, and they want you to come up with a poll. Well, what you do is you come up with the message that you want your audience to get. So here I've sort of covered up. Now we just have the two messages,
Mhm.
and then you add "Do you believe" in front, and you add a yes, no opinion on the bottom, and you've made a push poll that the people taking it think, oh yeah, somebody cares what I feel about this social issue, but really you're being inoculated in the belief that the media is helping the Democrats and
Mhm.
et cetera. So push polling.
Everybody
Okay,
plays that game. The Democrats do the same
they
thing.
certainly do. Yeah.
Well, that's the frightening part. It's almost like the Cold War, but applied to social media and surveys.
Yeah, and pretty much even if it's why don't you sign this petition? I'm sort of getting leery of those because the result of signing the petition is, oh, well, while you're here, why don't you donate some money?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I did donate some money to the various campaigns, like the Georgia senators, but
Mhm.
oh man, am I getting the emails?
But you can answer the poll, you can answer the surveys or the whatever without donating money. Now, the question I
Mostly you
have is,
can.
do they take your answer, and throw it away if you don't give money? But I'm hoping that they take your answer and count it in.
That's a good question.
That is a real good question, Sylvia.
Mm.
Disinformation is proliferative in our world, unfortunately. And I don't know if I don't. I'd like to hear people's opinion. How do you kind of reduce the risk of disinformation?
You need a new government, and it's so pervasive. It goes back to education, goes back to that anyone can have a child. You don't need, so children are not getting educated well, or it's just scattershot, right? Children are scattershot educated.
Mhm.
And how do you change the world is where you end up with, kind of. How do you like that for an answer?
I think you have to start by not sending kids to church because they learn to not think when they go to church.
Yeah.
They're supposed to just accept what they hear.
Isn't there freedom of religion, though, Glenn?
Well, there is freedom of religion. That's fine. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I don't send my kids to church. I offer though, so
Mhm.
they have the choice. In fact, I told my son he could drive when he was 16 if he would go to the Unitarian thing on sex education and all that. And he
Mhm.
said, I'd rather not do that. I'll wait to drive.
Yeah.
He's 50 years old now, but
But you really are talking about the decoupling of religion from education.
Well, I'm talking about that. I'm also talking about just the things they teach you in religion. They teach you things in religion that are just as silly as any of the conspiracy theories we say. I mean, if you accept that some guy sent his only son to die on a cross to die for our sins, which is central to a lot of Christians. I hope I'm not offending people, but if you believe that, you'll believe virtually anything. I mean, there's just no logic to it. There's no proof. And people are conditioned to accept that. And I know a number of people who say they really like religion because life is complex and you can get answers and you just accept it. And I know one of the people is with that view is a big Trump supporter, and they also happen to, in this case, be Catholic, which is normally a little bit more analytic. I mean, most, it's not like the religious right in general, but anyway, I think that that it's religion and science aren't compatible.
Okay. Interesting.
Here, here.
But, you know, with regard to the discussion about solutions and, you know, better education, more education, well, if you look back, talking about latency again, if you look back even, what, 20 years ago, we had major TV outlets, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, that sort of thing. And when Nixon got impeached, I think that there was much less disagreement about what the facts actually were. But now we've got, apparently, according to that social dilemma thing that you put me onto, Mario, that, you know, with all the social media going on, people have abandoned those respected news outlets, and now they're getting just bizarre crap from, I guess, from, and of course, that's another latent effect, is that geezers like me and some of my pals have steadfastly refused to get on any social media, so we really don't have any firsthand knowledge of it. I certainly don't. I tell
I'm
people,
another one like that.
yeah, I tell people that I don't do U-Book and I don't do Facebook.
I do both. I'm alarmed by what I see, some shirt-tail relatives, you know, and think the things they post and the things they believe. But then I'm alarmed at what a lot of people believe.
And years ago, I saw it with a lot of my wacko friends that would post some just outrageous crap that I would keep getting on their case about and saying, well, I looked something up on Snopes and you're just way out in left field. And I fervently await your profound apologies. And of course, you never get them. And what these people are doing is they're forwarding an email from a friend of a friend of a friend, and they would rather believe that damn email than like NASA or NOAA or some of that stuff.
And they'll just dismiss Snopes as just a liberal media source that shouldn't be trusted
It all
anymore.
boils down to conspiracy. You know, what these people are saying is that it's all trumped up against you know, us people that have the right stuff.
One of the problems is that a lot of people don't care if what they're saying is true. It's more important if it feels right. And so I had somebody on Facebook come out with this meme that had Kamala Harris saying, "Oh, Republicans, we're going to come for you, and you're going to be punished," and she never said that. And I was able to, you know, quickly find a number of fact-checking sites that she never said that. And so I, you know, posted back to this guy who's one of my acquaintances on Facebook, and I said, "Hey, you know, I don't insist that you know who you vote for or anything, but what you said about Kamala Harris was just flat wrong." And he said, "Oh, well, you know, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, I didn't even click through to the story. It just sounded like something she would say, so I posted it." So, you know, if it feels right, promulgate it.
Yeah, that's typical. I know someone has done a study on these things that are posted, and they find that most of the people read the first couple sentences and then
Right.
if it seems right, they send it on and they've never even read it.
It's Goebbels and the big lie, right? The more you tell it, the truer it gets. you
Yeah,
know?
I knew that.
What happened to the word propaganda? Why don't we ever call the stuff we seem to have almost diluted or desensitized people to it by calling it disinformation?
That propaganda is an old Russian word. Sounds
But
like a Russian word.
it seems so much more apt to me. It
Mhm.
resonates with me.
But
so
you're
much.
right. We've stopped using it, right?
Yeah.
That word.
What happened?
I don't know.
Good question.
Where'd it go?
But disinformation sounds more intellectual, but propaganda is a better term.
Yeah.
And I think that the average person probably understands propaganda better because we've used it for so long, against the Russians and what the communists and such. I
Right.
think they understand it better than disinformation. So
That's
maybe-
like WMD, which used to be weapons of mass destruction, but now it's WMD.
Yeah.
It's less frightening.
And that's my worry.
Yeah, it used to be shell shock, that was pretty direct. And
Right.
now, so yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's PSDC. PD. I got it.
PTSD.
Yeah.
PTSD.
One of those things. 4 characters.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
4-letter word.
That's right.
Well, that's why they have a PhD in rhetoric. My son
Don't
is-
hear that anymore either.
That's right. You don't.
In my father's time, rhetoric was actually, didn't mean speech giving, as probably most people would think now. It meant marshaling a cogent argument
Mhm.
that's likely to be true.
It still means that.
Well, no, I know it does,
Yeah.
but in the general mind, it may not anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think it evokes very negative feelings and negative thoughts these days. And so it's worrisome in many respects.
Are you aware of any significant initiative to foster critical thinking, or whatever you want to call it, analytic thinking, in the schools? I know, for example, in Texas, it was in one of the educational plans, and it drew a response from the state GOP in Texas, saying they were against students learning to think for themselves and question authority like religion and stuff like that. That was a platform of theirs. Well,
Yeah.
1 year, I think. I'm not sure whether that's true. I'd have to check it on Snopes.
I'm not aware of any initiatives in that area. I don't know if others on
Yeah.
this Zoom do.
Lately, I've been following a lot of things going on in the social psychology arena. And there are a couple of universities in Australia, University of Queensland in particular, has some kind of program, and I don't have a good sense of how actually widely implemented it is, but to teach critical thinking, not only in the university, but in the schools leading up to the university. And in the conversation, that particular online essayist, essay channel, there's been a lot of posting about critical thinking from people there at the University of Queensland, and that's where John Cook, the originator of skeptical science, got his honors degree in physics, and then went back when he picked up on his factual arguments were not doing much convincing because it was the wrong psychological approach. Well, it was a frontal approach with facts, and you need to be a bit more circumspect. So anyway, Ellerton, I think, is the name of the psychologist that has been posting a lot on the conversation and critical thinking, education, critical thinking.
I'll have to read up on that, because I am really worried that people don't think, they just
And there's a lot of, at least I've encountered a lot of concern about teaching critical thinking, but the problem seems to be that it's very hard to transfer from one area to another. Like in science, we use critical thinking all the time. It's more by example than by precept, but nevertheless, at least if you go into the graduate programs, you're there and you learn in critical thinking, or else you'll get your head handed to you at a seminar. And among other things. But actually in the schools where it ought to be introduced, if you can get it in there and get it implemented correctly, I don't know much about what's going on there in the US.
Yeah.
And most of the science literacy and so on tests, like what the NSF used to do, I haven't looked at the most recent ones, but they're mostly factual types of things rather than addressing actual process of critical thinking. And that's why Dan Cahan has said you can't teach your way out of climate science denial, because the people who do best on those science literacy things are, for the most part, conservatives that are deniers of climate science.
That's interesting.
Slightly, but nevertheless, it's they tend to do better on those. And I don't think you can, for example, my pet peeve, of course, is climate science right now. And I haven't seen any of these assessments of climate science awareness that really address thermal science. And that's the core of climate science. Things like, the heat content, the difference between heat as measured in quantity, like kilowatt hours or whatever, and in quality, like degrees Kelvin or whatever.
Right.
And a lot of people don't understand climate science because they simply aren't climate science literate. Never mind the change aspect. If you were literate in climate science and you knew reasonably what kind of data are being gathered now, if you understood climate science, you would be a believer in climate science, climate change, because the data are unequivocal.
Well, if
Anyway.
people knew that the seminal article on climate science was actually written by Arrhenius in the Philosophical Magazine in something like 1885.
It was 90s. It was in the mid 90s.
Or mid 90s.
1896.
Okay.
Yeah. And he did a little bit more on that afterward.
Grover Cleveland was president.
It was very clever. It was very clever paper.
Yeah. And he did it with not a lot of on target data. I mean, he didn't have a really good handle on the absorption of carbon dioxide, the spectral.
No, but it was better than you might think because of the astronomical measurements. They had reflection from the moon and so forth.
Yeah, right. But that really doesn't get into the thermal wavelength bound. And of course, as
Oh,
far
right.
as carbon dioxide as an absorber of thermal IR, you go back to 1860 or late 1850s, and geez, I've forgotten his name right now. Anyway, he did measurements on it, but it wasn't on carbon dioxide at atmospheric concentration. It was samples he manufactured in the lab.
Although now all you have to do is look at the glaciers melting. You know, you don't have to look very far to see what's going on.
Right. That doesn't tell you why, but
Yeah, it doesn't tell you
Yeah,
why.
but I think most people, even if they're not interested in science, can understand what's going on around them, the
Yeah.
weather patterns being different, farmers in so many countries having difficulty. So I think it's great to know the why and wherefore of climate change and what's going on. But I think what's part of the problem is that people are not being told actually in relatively simple words that they can understand. The means of communicating anything from the government are really very cumbersome. Look at how they miscommunicated the whole COVID pandemic issue. Most people are now totally confused about mask and not masking, about vaccines and not vaccines, about side effects and not side effects. And really, it really just takes straightforward speaking to the people in a language that they understand, because they know what's going on. They see things around them.
Yeah, you could somehow admix it with football scores. You could get people to listen.
yeah.
One of the most important ways to communicate is to find common ground. Bruce King, our former governor, used to set people down, and even if the disagreements were huge, he'd find some area that they could agree on, and you build up from that. So if you want to get some conservative farmer to take stock in climate change, you might talk to him about things that affect him, like crops starting later in the year, and sort of come at it from a just the way it affects farming angle. But that's a strategy. I had a thought on what Glenn was saying about religion, and should we try to discourage people from religion because it sort of cements pseudoscientific types of beliefs. And there's a time and place for all those battles. If I've got a Catholic uh, preacher or father who is marching with me to oppose the creationists getting young Earth creationism put into schools, right at that time, he's my ally, and that's not the time to bring up this whole Jesus came back from the dead thing. Maybe not the right time to bring that up. But and the other aspect of what Glenn was saying is that the creationists are just hemorrhaging young members. They are leaving the church. And I got one more screen share. So I found this on Answers in Genesis, the kind of #1 young Earth creationist website. They've far surpassed the old venerable Institute for Creation Research, but they're afraid the pandemic is going to accelerate. But so this age group has already been leaving the church in droves for years, and they think the pandemic is just going to make it worse. So they've got problems keeping their flock on board. That's for sure.
Who is Barna?
The fastest growing.
What?
Secularism is the fastest growing religion, actually. People leaving the church.
So who is this? Barna is Um, huh. It's a Christian polling company.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Well, everyone, I have to leave. I have to eat dinner and then get to bed. I'm still
I'm with you.
okay, but I really enjoyed this conversation. And John, thank you very much for inviting me to come talk about this issue today.
Thank you.
a lot,
Thank you
Mario.
very
Have a
much.
great
Thank
day.
you, Mario. And we're going to put it on YouTube so people will be able to make comments and the conversation might continue.
That sounds wonderful.
Oh,
On
righty then.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Mario. That was fascinating.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Take care,
Good night.
everybody.
Night.
See ya.
All right.
Thanks, Dave and John, for including me in this. It was interesting.
Excellent.
It was interesting. Thanks for,
Yeah, Glenn, it was good seeing you again.
Yeah.
It's been a long time
too.
since Academy of Science.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Dave,
was
I'm
gonna
gonna,
be back, but grandkids are nearby, so we're here now in Madison for good.
Yeah, I know.
since we're doing the
Just wanted to
Zoom
say
thing,
hi.
Dave, I'll get you Glenn's particulars so that you can add him as an invitee.
We-
every month.
Yeah.
We could do that. We just add them to our little Google Groups thing.
All right.
Okay.
Nice
Alrighty
seeing
then.
you all.
Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Stay safe out there.
You too.
Thanks a
Alrighty.
lot.
Bye.
See
Night.
ya.
Bye.